All right, welcome. Today we're going to talk about dramatic plot structure. And this you probably learned in other classes, but we're going to go a little bit in more depth today and talk about it as it applies to film. Okay? So the art of storytelling, whether it's in a novel or in a play or in our case in a film, has always depended on really, really strong dramatic structure. And so the structure, of course, can be linear, but it also can be non-linear. And we're going to talk about both of those things um, this week in class. Okay, so depends on what the author's needs and wishes are as to whether that director will do it in a linear pattern or a non-linear pattern. But all of these, regardless, the structure contains four really important parts. And we're going to go over those today and then talk about how they fit together. Okay, so first of all, the first part, and I'm hoping that you're writing these down, the first part is the exposition. And the exposition basically introduces us to characters, shows some of their interrelationships, and places them within a believable time and place. Okay, so this part can be relatively short, but it basically introduces us to the overall mood of the story and probably introduces us to either the main character or the main villains. Okay. The second part, and this is the longest part in the piece, is known as the complication. And so this is where the story's conflict is developed. So there are kind of two beliefs here in terms of what needs to happen in the complication to get a good story. The first one is that all points in the complication, all scenes, action in the complication should do one of two things. The first thing is that all these scenes along this line should lead us to this third part. You probably already know that this third part is going to be the climactic moment in the story. So all of these scenes should lead us to that point. Okay? And if they don't, the second thing that they should do along the way is to help develop character. Those two things are really crucial during the complication. Okay? And then, of course, this leads us to this one point in the story, which is the climactic point in the story, and that is the point of highest tension. Some people refer to it as the point of no return. If you sort of think about the stereotypical Western, for instance, a Western usually ends in a shootout, and that shootout would be considered the climactic scene. Okay? And then the last part is a French term known as denouement, and this is the part that follows the climax, and it can vary in length, but basically it offers the resolution to the story. What happens as a result of this climactic scene? So in some cases it might present a sense of calm, but it basically ties all of the things together at the end of the story before we hit the rolling scroll at the end with the credits. Okay? You'll often hear about storytellers talk about the three parts of a story, the three acts of a story, and that's basically the exposition, the complication, and the denouement. Okay? So those are really the three acts of a story. Okay? So what we're going to do next here is I want to explain to you this philosophy that I have about good stories. And good stories avoid what I refer to as shiny penny syndrome. Shiny penny syndrome is the situation where elements in a story do not contribute to the whole. And sometimes shiny pennies look pretty and you want to go out there in the street and pick them up. But if you go out there in the street and pick them up, you might not see that truck coming by, and it might derail you. So shiny penny is basically anything in a story that looks pretty but probably isn't necessary. And so you see this a lot with maybe gratuitous scenes. So gratuitous violence or gratuitous sex, for instance, are things that bad storytellers include. This is not to say that stories can't have violence and can't have sex in them, but but if they're done simply to titillate their audiences as opposed to actually leading towards the story or contributing to the story, then they should be avoided. Okay, those would be shiny pennies. This falls into this category of a good story needing to have a unified plot. And this is how we get this story to all kind of work together without straying at all. So good stories are unified in plot. And what this means is that each aspect of the story leads naturally, one step leads logically to the next. And so as it says here, in a tightly unified plot, nothing can be removed without significantly affecting or altering the whole. Okay. In short story writing, Edgar Allan Poe always talked about how if you could pull out one sentence in his story, it should change the overall meaning of the story. So every sentence in his short stories he hoped mattered. Same thing goes with a movie. I've got an example here, the picture from the movie Jaws, which is considered one of the most unified of all stories. There's really nothing in that movie that doesn't matter. Okay, everything leads us to the capture of this shark at the end of the story. Okay, so that relates to this last part here. A unified plot does not introduce out of thin air some kind of chance, coincidental, or miraculous happening, or some powerful superhuman force that swoops down out of nowhere to save the day. It's raining outside. You might have heard that thunder and lightning that just occurred outside. Pay no mind. There are a couple of things that I want to talk about with the unified plot, but basically everything in a story should matter. And so this is where we get to the great movie, The Incredibles, and we're going to talk to one of the most famous characters here. Here's a scene, and then I'll explain how this is an example of creating a unified plot.